chance for open discussion. Great, so we're recording. So again, we've gone over this slide at every workshop so far, and so here we are in August. We've had our live workshops in June and July focused on how to do the mapping in ArcGIS, how to use story maps. We had some office hours session in July, and now here we are in August, here to see some of your drafts. And then that will hopefully prepare you all to continue on and complete your story maps, which we're asking to be submitted by September 10th. And then we'll be reviewing those, providing any additional feedback for some folks, and then we'll select a few of them to be presented during our International Conference on Sustainable Development. That event should be held on September 22nd, and we'll be sharing more details about that soon. And then we'll be publishing those on an SDGs Today microsite and turning some of them into lesson plan resources that we can share with educators in our network. So we're very excited for these next steps. And we're very happy today also to have some of our story map experts. We have Michelle Thomas, Ross Donahue, and Amelia Semprevon from Esri's Story Maps team. They're going to help give you all some feedback and tips as we go along. So thank you all for being with us today. We also have Mariam Rabi'i from SDGs Today. So we're going to get right into it because we don't want to spend too much time. We want to give you all as much time to talk about your work so far and discuss as we can. So just a few tips for those who will be sharing, to please first just introduce yourself and any team members if you worked with a team, to share your topic and why you chose it, why it's important to you. Tell us what you're aiming to achieve with your story map. What are the main, what are the goals, actions that you want people to take away from this? And then just go ahead and walk us through your story map. You don't have to read through everything, but to just kind of highlight main sections, features, and if there's any particular questions that you have for our experts or kinds of feedback you're looking for, you can note that as well as you go along. So I believe first on the list today, the team from Reddington Middle School had asked to go first because I know some of you have to leave early. So why don't I go ahead and turn it all over to you? I believe we have Chris and Bonnie with us. So if you all want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and get started, and I'll, which one of you will be sharing? Because I can give you screen sharing privileges.
I'll be sharing.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the meantime, yeah, I'm Chris. I'm from Bloomington Middle School. I'm a high schooler now at Phillips Exeter Academy. But I really enjoyed working with my middle school teacher, Miss Freeman, who unfortunately isn't here today. We're also missing Tatiana Linka, which is another person from our middle school, who did a great job with the project. So I just want to say thank you to both of them. And then Bonnie, you can go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bonnie Magadri. I just graduated from Reddington Middle School and I'm headed off to Blair Academy for high school. I really enjoyed working with my teammates and Miss Freeman, who is a great mentor, and we're super excited to share our project with you all.
Yeah, so ours was basically talking about how marine pollution is impacted from school waste. So we're just going to start off with just some basic facts. So at the lunch table, you're going to see a lot of plastic being used, like from unwrapping, your hot meal, utensils. And during COVID, that amount of plastic is going to increase significantly. Um, so it starts there, and then we have this diagram here. Yeah, just alone, 30,000 pounds of plastic waste a year, and you're wasting a lot of money as well on it. And it's around 50 pounds per high school student, and elementary school students have around 100 pounds per student, which is pretty ridiculous amounts of plastic waste. This is like a map of like all the amounts of schools in New Jersey alone. So the purple dots are the New Jersey schools, all of them, and the blue and orange sections are school districts. Um, let's see if there's anything else. Um, yeah, food is biodegradable. But the plastic waste is generally thrown into the trash, and most of it will not break down, and uh, yeah. So then there's also the true cost of food. So basically, the food that we pay for, it doesn't really include the true cost of what it should be paid for. So like 1/3 of the food in the world is wasted, and that's the approximate price of it is around 1.3 billion in the U.S. that we pay for food, but the true cost of it should be around 3.9 million, and that's because of all uh, under thrown under the bus costs. That could be things like you know um, how we get our food from like sustainable ways, and the cost is just really hidden from us. And then we have some diagrams here, just two pictures, showing that a lot of this plastic is going to end up over there. This is a diagram that Tatiana found. Um, and yeah, you can see, it almost double that amount is spent on human health, and, the environment and biodiversity. And this is what really it should cost. Um, and then, there's still, it's just a very big amount. Um, and then Tatiana just selected some statistics here. So you can see these. Um, and yeah, that'll transition to our second one. We all did separate ones at first because our story maps weren't working. Luckily, we figured out how to fix it. So we just merged it with this. So Bonnie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so this story map kind of lets us know where our plastic goes. In the first couple of sections, um, it talks about how most of our plastic ends up in the ocean, and even if we don't intend for it to end up in the ocean, like with just different sources, like I guess wind, it ends up in the ocean. And then it slowly moves into microplastics and how the plastic breaks down. And microplastics are super harmful. And then it slowly goes into just giving us some statistics after it talks about the microplastics. And I like in our story map, we added some like visual comparisons. Like one of the comparisons were like a microplastic is the same size as a snowflake. And then towards the bottom of the story map, we kind of have a Q&A going on where there's questions, like commonly asked questions, and then some very helpful information as the answers. And Tatiana picked some pretty cool pictures that I think are visually appealing. And then towards the end, there's a really cool plastic history timeline, how slowly we've been consuming plastic and how it just keeps getting worse because of like the convenience people like.
Yeah. Bonnie also did another plastic one, and it reiterates the same idea. Um, and then our next one, I'll try to go a little bit faster through this. But basically, yeah, we saw a lot of school getting wasted in our personal cafeteria every day. But we didn't really understand how big it was of a problem until we actually went through the trash ourselves. So we did a food waste audit. And this is like, as you can see on the right, there's so much food being wasted, and it's kind of insane, how many plates, how much of like plastic utensils, these juice containers, these plastics, and all this food, and some liquids inside of the bucket for liquid waste. And it was just like really like incredible to see how much, like 500 students waste after lunches, and yeah, it was a lot. And then we saw that that's just one school, and imagine how many it'd be for all schools inside New Jersey. As I said, there's like thousands of schools inside of New Jersey, so it's very tough. Yeah, in New Jersey alone, there's like 1.28 million students, and as we said before, the statistics are just incredible. And I think like one way that I personally figured out, like, or not, I didn't figure out the problem obviously, but we had to understand other people's perspective of it. Um, so like, as like a general person in the cafeteria, you generally don't care about like throwing out plastics or waste, and there's a lot of like different waste forms that aren't intentional for you. Like it's not your fault that you're getting served on styrofoam trays, or that all the things that you are eating are wrapped in plastic. So people like don't finish eating because of like certain underlying structures inside the school, like shortened times, to fit everything into the day. And then when people patterns include like people are not like eating, they just throw it away because they don't feel like incentive to take it home. And there's also like an onus being on the consumer to recycle and do everything right, rather than the producer and the school to set up systems that people would thrive in and reduce their plastic waste. And overall, I think there's just a theme of like not feeling as like a steward of the school, and you're a part of taking care of it. And then we also related to the Sustainable Development Goal 12, responsible consumption and production, and I think it just goes hand in hand with it. So I just thought that was pretty interesting, where you can have global per capita food waste, responsible management of chemicals and waste, as we saw before, yeah, waste generation, encouraging companies to adopt sustainable practices. Like I said, the burden shouldn't be on the consumer, and procurement practices and sustainable lifestyles. All of those apply. Wait, did I miss? Oh yeah. So here are some other things you need to think about: watershed pollution, MPS pollution, non-point source pollution rather, and what we can do to mitigate our impact as students. And yeah, this is our last one. So uh, we can really just like stop a decent amount of plastic pollution from what we do at our schools. So we have like multiple things that we need to live, like air, water, shelter, sleep, and it's our food. And obviously a lot of that is just wasted. I mean, like if you just think about how much food you're wasting every year, it's very like disturbing, to see that at the cafeteria, hundreds of other people are wasting that much, if not more. So we're also thinking about, other ways we can reduce it at our school, using this pyramid. So like reduction and reuse of resources. For example, like we're going to try to create a share table, where if you finish a food, or you don't want a food, but it ends up on your plate. Let's say a bag of cookies or something, but you don't really have room to eat it and you haven't touched it. You can put it on the table, and someone else can take it. Obviously, it's not very sanitary during COVID, as a result, because you're sharing items, and there's some other steps on the list. Composting is something we're definitely going to work on. Um, yeah, and here's some other things that we thought were like good suggestions as far as things go. I think this is probably an interesting one. Collaborating with other schools, like instead of buying like small amounts of supplies, buying sustainable supplies, with like all of the schools in New Jersey, that's going to reduce the cost a quite significant margin. And obviously leftovers, make sure to eat them later, and compost. And then Tatiana filmed a video, and this was on plastics and climate change generation. I'll put it in the chat so you guys can see it later. I also put a video on the food audit, and how like COVID impacted this. And the best thing is to create action and awareness. So we just put in some hashtags here. So these are ones that we took from the website, and we also looked them up on Instagram to see how they were doing. So yeah, I personally like the SDG 14 the most, but I think all of these are great. And yeah, all the links are listed here as well. So thank you so much again, and anything to add on?
I just wanted to add on, I don't know if we mentioned this before, but we kind of chose this topic because we really noticed how much like waste was being formed in our school, and how many like trash bags would get taken out, and how people would just like mindlessly throw things in the trash without thinking whether, they'd be like they should be recycled or they should go into the trash. And then so we kind of focused in the cafeteria, and then also related it back to SDG 14 with life underwater. So I think we did a pretty good job combining both like the topics we were interested in and wanted to create a storyboard on.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I learned a lot and very inspired seeing that especially that picture of all the food waste, your audit that you did at the school was very impactful. Do you have any particular questions or any immediate thoughts from some of our experts that we have that we can talk a little bit about? Any things that you all want feedback on in particular?
Yeah, sure. So I think like when I was creating it, and like one thing that me and Tatiana noticed is like it's a lot of scrolling. Like she was trying to prevent like scroll fatigue as well, but it's just like very hard in this kind of project to like reduce the amount of information. And I think on hers, it's more factual, but like the mindset, it's kind of hard to explain it like quickly, I guess. I know I could have made it a little bit shorter, but how do you like prevent scroll fatigue, I'd say, like in this kind of presentation where you have a lot to cover? Is that like, separating it out, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing in this case? And is it better to make it all one like story map, or is it better to just link out, I guess?
I'm going to let one of our StoryMap experts answer that question about separating it out versus having it all in one. I think my thought would be to have it all as one, even if that makes it longer, and then maybe thinking about how to, I feel like there were certain topics that came in different places that could maybe, might reorder some things a little bit. But let me see what our StoryMap experts think.
I have a lot of thoughts, but Ross, I'm going to pass it to you first.
Great. Well, first, awesome job. It was really fun to see you present and see sort of how you've taken this huge concept and really focused in on your specific community and developed really beautiful stories. In terms of your question related to scroll fatigue, it's something that we think about a lot on our team. With any sort of digital storytelling content, people's attention span is very limited, right? They talk about this thing called the blink test. If people don't know what action to take and the amount of time it takes to blink, then they're gonna lose interest and go to another page and just sort of ignore your content. So we're always thinking about how do we keep people engaged and keep them reading, and then have a clear call to action because they've dedicated this time to reading your content. You don't want them to be left with a sort of, they're excited about this topic, but don't know what action to take next. So in terms of scroll fatigue, there's a couple of things I was noticing and would suggest. So first, I was curious if you've explored the navigation bar. So within the design panel, there's the ability to have these little bookmarks throughout your story, so that people can easily jump to different sections. If you have a longer story, this is a way of breaking up your content. So if, for instance, a reader only has time for a couple minutes to read some of your story, but want to come back and jump to a different section, that can help. The navigation bar also allows you to just easily sort of think about organizing your content so that you've got a clear sort of introduction, middle, and with different names, of course, but that can be a really helpful technique. Another thing I was curious if you've explored are StoryMap's collections. So StoryMap collections, it's a feature within the tool, but it simply allows you to combine multiple stories in one place. So with a collection of stories related to this topic, you're able to have a nice sort of way of navigating between stories. I like that you guys use the hyperlinks at the end. I thought that was really clever as a way of sort of keeping readers engaged and having them go on to the next chapter, so to speak. One idea is to experiment with the embed block for those stories so that it gives you have a little bit more control over how they look and they sort of pop off the story page, because I could imagine a reader seeing some hyperlinked text and just kind of missing it at the end. And so being able to have sort of a more visually prominent, keep reading section, like read the next chapter, read about da da da, that could be a really great way of keeping people connected to your stories. In terms of that scroll fatigue, we also have various blocks. So one is called the slideshow block, and that's more of a horizontal reading experience. And so what you might consider is breaking up your vertical scrolling with some of the sort of horizontal movement. And so what that can do is reduce people's sort of scroll, and have them pause and engage and actually click and move, in more of a horizontal pattern. So it changes up that pattern for your readers. Over to you, Michelle, or responses from. Yes.
Yeah, a lot of what I was thinking about the scroll fatigue, definitely collections are a great option, especially if you have almost like multiple chapters or multiple parts of a story. It's really nice. You can create it so that it's tabbed and it's really easy to like just click your keyboard and go to the next story, which I think would be really nice. I think the thing that struck me the most is when you got to the part where you all did the actual inventory at the school, which led me to the question which you answered at the end, which is, why did you do this project? Your story is, as with all stories, is the most compelling part of this, is like why you care and what you did and what you're planning to do as an example for other people. I think because you do have multiple stories, I think one thing that you might do is try to tie in a little bit of the personal story in each of those, especially at the beginning, but maybe a little bit in between. But, especially that first story to kick it off, like, why is this important to you? It was very striking, that picture and the work that you're putting into it and how you're applying that in your school. So to keep that consistent narrative, I would definitely tie it into each of the stories. I love it. And you guys did a great job.
Thank you all. We really appreciate the feedback, and we'll try our best to incorporate it into our story maps.
Yeah, thank you again. Sorry, I mean to ask another question, but I was wondering about like the call to action at the end. I think like on the like personal connection, we kind of lack that with this incorporating the story, but like how do you like create like a good call to action that like really motivates people? Because I feel like we shared like all of the data and like what we did, I guess, but it doesn't really feel like we're asking other like incorporating other people, besides the hashtags, but that's very simple to do. So I'm not sure like how to motivate or like empower people, I guess.
Well, I'll give my recommendation just because this is kind of always my approach is, people are always the powerful part of the story, right? That center part of the story. If you first of all can give an example of someone else, like you had that video, tell a little more of like an example of success stories, like what impact did it have? What impact did one person have on a local community, someone who's a student or like a group of students? Like what kind of big impact can you have on that? I think maybe giving actual resources for them, like the final story, giving them like links to actual resources that they can go and get more information, kind of get that SDG 14, 12 and 14, how are those tied together? So I think a few really good resources so that if they want to take action, they know what to do next. And with your recommendations, I think that would be helpful. Ross?
Yeah, I agree completely, Michelle. And Chris, you've kind of identified the age-old question that we're all trying to figure out. How do we motivate people to do something, right? To change their behavior, to take an extra step. And I think you've outlined some really good sort of bullet point ideas there towards the end. And I think like Michelle said, linking out to additional resources. But honestly, like a big part of this is tying it back to who your audience is and what your purpose is. So if your audience are your peers in school, you're going to have a very different sort of call to action versus policymakers versus teachers versus parents versus school administrators, right? And so really honing in on who do you want to read this story, and then thinking about what sorts of items help motivate them. What would you be willing to do? Put yourself in the shoes of a reader, right? I think there's a lot of things, a lot of elements that you've identified, sort of that, we all are just so enamored by this food audit. It's such a great idea. One of the call to actions could be do a food audit in your school. Realize sort of what does waste look like in your school, and maybe link to a helpful guide that you guys use to figure out how to do a food audit. I would love to see every school across the country do a food audit, and then have some reflections on like, what does it mean to be after eating, like just discarding waste without thinking about it. I think another call to action is just having some signage right next to the trash can that says like, hey, you're about to throw this out. This food goes to the dump. Did you know? Da, da, da. And so there's definitely some educational aspects, but it's also making people pause and change that normative behavior of discarding waste and think for a second before they do it. So again, just having some really tangible actions that are tied to your audience and who you're going to be putting this story out in front of will be really helpful. And then linking out to those resources. I think those are great ways to engage your readers.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone. And yeah, that's it for my questions. Do you have anything else, Bonnie?
No, I just wanted to also say like a final thank you. We really appreciate it. And we're glad you guys enjoyed our story and where we're coming from.
Well, thank you both and to Tatiana as well for the great presentation, and thank you to Michelle and Ross for the very helpful and specific feedback. I just wanted to mention, I put another link you all might be interested in the chat to this organization called Cafeteria Culture. We learned this very inspiring story recently of how students in New York City mobilized to advocate to get rid of the styrofoam trays, but they found that the compostable ones were so much more expensive. But with this organization, they were able to join with school districts in Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami. I think there were several huge school districts that banded together to purchase a bigger quantity and bring that cost more in a comparable amount to what they had been paying for the plastic ones. And then they were able to get them to switch. So like you said, that was your idea too, about trying to band together with other school districts in New Jersey. That might be, an organization that could support in that. So just another idea there. So I believe we have Ashley Junn next from Milburn Middle School, who's going to talk to us about her story map. Ashley.
Hello.
Right.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Let me make sure you have sharing privileges here.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Okay, great.
Okay. So, my name is Ashley June. I live in Short Hills. I go to Milburn Middle School. I'm going to 8th grade this year. And my story map is about fast fashion and microfiber pollution. The reason that I chose to research about this topic for this project is because I'm really interested into clothes, and people around me, like my friends, are like more getting into like fashion. So I wanted to find the effect of like those behaviors, how that is affecting the ocean, which goes back to the idea and connects to SDG 14. And I also wanted to change my behaviors of shopping because I do shop a lot of clothes. So I wanted to find how I can positively impact the ocean and just like nature in general. So what I'm trying to achieve and my aims for this presenting about microfiber pollution is that I want people to know the magnitude and the severity of this issue, because again, it says there, it is an invisible crisis that humans are going to be facing in the future. So fast fashion speeding toward ocean pollution. So first I begin with just like giving a basic introduction of what is going around in the world, and I go right into how bad it's a situation that humans are facing now. So these are like the social aspect. I start up by defining what fast fashion is, which is basically that the trends that humans face, and those are like changing rapidly. It's almost changing like every single month. So that means that the demand for clothes are going very high. And the effect of these are aligned all here. There's some quantifications there. And who produces microfibers? I explained about how laundry machines are creating excessive amount of microfibers. And this is so important because if you see the quantification here, 700,000 microfibers are let out in a standard wash cycle. So that means every single household, every time they every time they play the washing machine, it's going to release 700,000 microfibers. So just adding up all those numbers, that's going to be just incredibly high. And I go and talk about toxic textile dyes. So if you look at the right picture here, this is how the rivers, it's called the Citron River, is being affected by the microfibers. And here's some more information about that. So yeah, it's also 1/3 of our planet's rivers are classified as too polluted for any human contact, which just really just kind of explains and indicates how much our rivers are being polluted. And here just a picture about all the trash and the dump in near the rivers. So moving on to the aspect of oceans, the SDG 14, I talk about how fast fashion pollutes the ocean, which is again like laundries, and then it goes right into directly into the oceans, which can also hurt the human food chain. And about microfibers, here I just give some quantifications and how it exactly, like the process of how it leads to the microfibers polluting ocean. And if I go down to here is like my research and like the experiment that I kind of researched more about. So this research was about how scientists went deep into Beaufort Sea and the Canadian Arctic archipelago to see how much microfibers are contaminated in those waters. So here's my first Beaufort Sea, and in the right I have all the results of what the scientists have found out. And for the Canadian Arctic archipelago, here's all the results. And I included a link to a CNN news where you can just find more about this experiment. Here's a code that Steve Allen talks about. And here I talk about how microfiber exposures can harm the fishes in the oceans. So this is another experiment that I kind of searched about, which is like a experiment conducted by the Duke University using Medaka fishes. So here's like the results of what actually happened. And the excessive usage of water here, I talk about how when making clothes, it requires excessive amount of water. And that means that sometimes fashion industries and manufacturers need to get that water out of like their like nearby rivers or oceans. So that means like those oceans are going to be drying up in the future. So we see that in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan already like lakes have been and sea have been dried up. And now moving on to the solutions, how can we reduce fast fashion? I first talk about how COVID-19 made it much more easier for many companies to change their like company goals and shift it into like sustainable fashion, because social media have boosted the awareness of environmental changes. And I go on to government, what governments can do, because France actually they are forcing their citizens in France starting on January 2025 to replace their laundry machines with a filter that will kind of prevent microfibers being exposed too much into the ocean. And what can companies do? And as many people know, Patagonia is a sustainable company. Here's like a little kind of their history about what they're doing. And here, the next part is what are some things that Patagonia are working on, so their goals for the past many years. And I go into another company named Arcelic, which is pretty interesting because they actually created a laundry machine that will again prevent microfibers being exposed and released too much, because because it's basically like they made this laundry machine using PET bottles, and these PET bottles are polyester forms or plastic bottles. So they were able to save 5.7 million kWh energy and block 885 tons of CO2 emissions being produced, which is a large amount of number. And what can civil society do? So this Marine Litter Solution is a global organization, and they're basically trying to decrease marine waste and debris. And here are some six key objectives that they brought up, which is first, raising awareness; second, researching for facts; third, promoting for the best policies, like making great legislations, spreading knowledge to people; and enhance recovery and preventing pellet losses that might be happening from the clothes that are being shipped from abroad over the sea. And here I go really into what can you do to decrease microfiber pollution. So I'm really making some connection with the viewers. How can they also make a change and to their lifestyle and behaviors? So here are some things that they can do. They can use a sustainable brand like Patagonia, as already mentioned, Levi's and H&M. They can use secondhand or rented garments like shops like Depop and ThredUp. They can donate their baby clothes, like selling on eBay, Etsy, Poshmark, etc. They can also use social media like Facebook Marketplace, which has been used by many people. There's also shopping mall textile bins that people can use, and you can also use your voice to let others know what do you want specific policies being established to decrease microfiber pollutions. So you can bring up a legislation to the government or private companies about what you want to change, about what you would just generally want your companies to change. And I would like to end this StoryMap presentation with a note of that we should all take a responsibility, because microfiber pollution is a global environmental threat, as well as saying that slow fashion is the only sustainable future for the industry and the planet. So yeah, that's the end of my StoryMap.
So much, Ashley. That was great. Let's hear from our experts. Or and any Ashley, let us know if you also have any questions in particular that you would like the experts to touch on.
I actually wanted to ask about let me just go on the experiment about in the Beaufort Sea and Canadian archipelago, because I felt like there was a bit lack of information still, and I wanted to incorporate more. So do you guys recommend that? Because I'm not sure if this is a great amount, or if you guys recommend having more into it.
Ross, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can start. Again, great job. I really loved your mixed use of different blocks, and you have a clear, design aesthetic that's coming through in your story, which I think yields a much more engaging and pleasing reading experience. So great job. And you've taken this huge concept and kind of distilled it down. In terms of this specific question, something that I really like about this is it takes this large concept and kind of makes it, on the ground. So you take this large context and you provide context on the ground for how it's actually impacting communities and areas. And so for me, I think this is a really nice way of driving home that this isn't just this abstract thing, but is actually impacting individuals and ecosystems. And it relates back to the SDG really well, and marine impacts overall. So personally, I really like the fact that you're bringing this in. I would say, your question about whether you want to develop it more or not, personally, I think this could become a story in and of itself. Just digging into the this Arctic Ocean application of the pollution. So I would say it's okay to stay pretty high level here. It provides context. It reinforces the topics that you bring into your story already. But I love that you're using this map tour block. I would say that again, consider using that navigation bar. So in the design panel there, you can enable navigation. And so that will allow you to have these bookmarks to jump to different sections within your story. It's, like we talked about earlier around scroll fatigue and being able to, help your reader gauge where you are in the narrative. That'll be really helpful. And in case you don't know where that is, if you just click on the design at the top of your screen, yep, there. And then on the right, see that navigation right there, yep. If you enable that, it'll then create these little items there. And so if you click on one of those, it'll jump to a different section and you can modify that text. You can create new sections if you want, but that's how you create the navigation bar.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I'll jump in just with a few comments. Again, I think it's a fantastic topic. I love the fact that you did it, but I think it's something that everyone can relate to, right? And it's something that everyone can do something about as an individual or, a larger group. The thing that really struck me is the content that you gathered is so solid. It's fantastic research, and the order in which you put it, defining the problem, giving it, like Ross said, a real instance of what's happening now somewhere else, but then also looking at the problem, and then what are other people doing about it, and taking it from a very global scale, and bringing it down, and then what you can do about it. It was just a very clear path of what is the problem, how is it impacting things, what are organizations doing, and what can I do. And I thought that was a really good structure for information. I think trying in some way to call out some of those actions a little bit more, whether it's increasing the text size or using some kind of sidecar slideshow. I think, there's some very, very clear calls to action. And I think being able to just bring those out a little bit more, I think might be helpful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
That's good. And I think, we've heard great feedback from our experts. If any of the peers on the call or other eco ambassadors have any thoughts to share as well, we'd love to hear from you too. And I think our next person to share, we have a teacher, William Bertolotti, from Plain Edge School District in New York, one of our stellar eco ambassadors and educators that we love working with. So Will, if you want to take it away now.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Good morning. So I'm Will Bertolotti, Plain Edge High School. I'm just going to quickly share my screen and let's see. Finding the tab. 1 second. And yep. All right, we're live. So I guess I just a quick shout out to the student presenters. Your work's incredible. And as a teacher, my hope is really to leverage this type of GIS narrative storytelling with my research classes. The mindset being that the traditional research paper structure, after a while, could use a little bit of an update, and the ability to integrate both research text, images, and video onto like a single platform, I think is an incredible strength, and really I think it'll really draw students in and allow them both the structure and just the creative freedom to tell their stories. So on my end, I want to focus more on at the individual level, points of interest, just to help our the viewer understand that when we talk about the environment at a global scale, but really oftentimes it's mostly it's our most intimate moments with nature that really convey that emotional connection with the world. And so I chose one specific location. It's the north end of Jones Beach Island in Long Island, New York, just as like almost like a prototype storyboard. And my goal is both to integrate really compelling images, real sites that one can see if they just spend a little bit of time near the water, and then reflecting on the greater, the greater significance of these very mundane moments. And the idea here is I'd like to then convey this resource to my students because I feel like as a tool, there are just so many applications. For my research students, just as we saw at the previous presentation, you could take a research project and put into GIS, and it's so much more engaging than just the paper version. For my other seminar students, the idea that you can go journaling with nature and that these journal entries can be supported with compelling visuals, right? Which then in turn can turn into calls to action. So I just created this rough draft just as a template, just to explore what could be done. And based on what I've seen this morning and the feedback to those projects, I'm really psyched. So the idea here was just the key for this was just capturing the beauty of nature, and also in a way both inviting the reader into a first person perspective of this location, just to understand like, wow, right? When you're in a kayak, right, on the north end of Jones Beach, right, here's what you see, right? The sights of nature are so vivid. There's so much life. There's so much energy here. And at the same time, there's an incredible vulnerability, right? We're seeing change in action. We're seeing the impact of humanity on the ecosystem. And there's this tension that's there, a tension that's palpable. And a lot of this really goes back to the relationship of humans with the greater environment. And what's interesting is I think all these calls to action are important in the sense that many people don't realize, right, the problems that are at stake. Or if they are knowledge of the problems, well, the pace of human society is just so frenetic that there is very little time to stop and actually think. What are the ramifications? Where are we going? And what we can do. I thought what was great about this platform is that you can link or share with the reader all these outside resources. And that's just a central hub, a repository for resources. I think this is such a cool tool. So then this continues, just reflections on different sites across Long Island that try to capture the wildlife in action. And in the classroom, I can see this turning into an activity where students just take a camera, right? Go to their local park, go to throughout their local neighborhood, just documenting what they see and just spending the time to reflect. And then from there, right, drawing their own conclusions, building an emotional connection, right, with nature and trying to convey that connection to the reader and then driving the call to action. But at the very least, right, to just slow down, reflect, think, and plan forward. The other thing I loved about this platform is that you can integrate video, right? And so here, I can see myself just having the students collect just a variety of different types of resources, static images, links, videos, audio, right? And then pulling them all together into this one cohesive piece. So aside from that, thank you for the opportunity to share. And I really am, this is a very rough draft and I'm really looking forward to refining it. Especially the idea of having that nav bar at the top so that readers could just jump from section to section. I think it's gonna be very helpful. So thank you.
Well, Will, I know I'm looking forward to reading it in depth because I can see that it's like a poem. It's so beautiful. The parts that I saw, and I want to go kayak there. I'm so excited.
I realized that, wow, you know, when you're in a kayak, you're pretty much socially distanced. When so,
Any feedback from our experts?
Well, I love this. I love it's, you know, you're taking this concept of, you know, the SDGs and marine conservation and making it place-based, right? So you're doing place-based storytelling, you're engaging people with their emotional connections to locations that, you know, is unique to each of us, right? You know, my experience in Long Island is going to be different than yours. And I think I love how you're, you know, giving the prompt of go out and reflect and sit and connect with nature in this place and what you see, right? Building those strong connections is what it's all about. You know, some other features that I just want to make sure that you know about, and are probably already thinking about, but I think anytime we can engage the senses with storytelling, you really form this deeper and richer connection, right? And you talked about the moving image, doing video, taking pictures. I would also suggest considering, you know, recording audio when they're sitting there, right? And so, you know, all of us have probably phones or access to something to record some audio. And so you can put that into the story in various points, and you could just imagine that being ambient noise, so just like water lapping up on the shoreline, a bird calling, something like that. Or it could be, you know, you actually talking into the recorder as you're sitting there talking about what you're seeing, how are you feeling, those kinds of things, right? And so I'm sure you're already thinking about all this, but just to say that I'm really excited about it, and those other, yeah, kind of forms of sort of transmedia storytelling stuff.
thanks, Ross. So I'd be able to have a voice playing in the background or sounds playing in the background throughout the entire. That's really cool.
So yeah, so there's a couple ways to incorporate audio. So one is just a straight audio block where you just upload an audio file. To do more of the sort of audio in the background of the story, you can do it within the sidecar block. And so as the reader scrolls, it will autoplay audio. And you know, when you go to the next slide, a new audio will play. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And then just for clarification, if I have a class's worth of storyboards, I can use the collection feature to put them into a single location.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And we're seeing some folks start to do that, but I think, you know, collections actually has a lot of different ways of customizing it and having different layouts that really help package it all together and make it a cohesive group that can be referred to, you know, for years and years in advance. So next year's students could look at, you know, what last year's did and be inspired. And so I love that you're thinking about that.
This is great. The student presenters today set a really high bar.
Seriously. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Will, my first question is, can I just come to your class and your class? Because that would be awesome. I'm really excited about, you know, the way you're taking this and thinking about introducing students to the platform, you know, through a really hands-on approach. So I was thinking about, as you all were talking about collections, one of the things as you went through all the beautiful, I love the mix of the photos and videos throughout. The videos are much more impactful if it's not all video, but sprinkled throughout it is a theme builder. We do have the ability to make a custom theme and add, like, you know, custom just header colors or separator colors throughout the entire thing. And so I was thinking about a collection, and I can imagine having each of your students create their own custom theme for their own story and putting them in a collection together, that would be really exciting, I think, because we're usually, doing the opposite, right? We're working with organizations who want one brand and want to use a theme throughout all their stories and all their collections for impact. But in your case, you want individuality. You want each student to tell their story. So I can see you using your story as an example of what can be done and the art of the possible, but then having them create their own theme and putting it in a really standard collection, that would be really exciting.
Thanks, Michelle. Definitely. Just the thought, usually when I tell students, all right, you're going to be writing a research paper and it's going to follow this exact format, you can see their eyes glaze over. And I think what's great is we can still hold them to that same level of professionalism while also giving them that freedom and the latitude to incorporate the requisite information, the requisite structures and citations and content, but with the freedom to integrate just moving visuals, that background audio, to really make it their own work. I think that really will increase student investment.
That's great.
The last thing I'll say is about maps, because we all love maps. And so some ideas that come to mind, I liked how you had maps incorporated into your narrative. There's 3 different main ways to incorporate maps. One is the express maps. So that's where you can just, at points, those that can help provide, that local context for the geography of where your story is taking place. There's also the ability to bring in pre-styled maps through the Living Atlas layers. That could be anything from sea level rise to land cover information to, census data. There's a whole, treasure trove of interesting layers. And, the third option is to actually create your own map and, in ArcGIS Online and bring it in that way. I would maybe say a fourth way, and since you're really into this kind of place-based storytelling stuff, the fourth way I would suggest is to actually have students hand draw a map of where they're sitting or where they're located, right? And so there's a whole slew of literature around cognitive mapping, mental mapping, and what appears on your hand-drawn map versus somebody else's hand-drawn map. You get a snapshot of people's connection to place. What do you observe? What, in a short amount of time, drawing this thing is removed from the map, but what also appears. And so just plant that seed as another sort of tangent you could go on.
Ross, are you saying that the students would create a screen recording of themselves hand drawing a map of Long Island, or creating some sort of...
Or just pen and paper, and then take a picture of it and put it into a story. And so I could see both being a cool, if you had a tablet, you could just do that kind of thing. But I would say, get a pen and paper and, take 5 minutes to draw a map of where your story takes place.
Cool. Thank you.
I love that idea of the hand drawing maps. It just reminds me of something that is like a big community organizing tool of community mapping and identifying resources in your community and thinking about how, you need to kind of do that as a first step to think about some of the actions you can take locally. So anyway, that's just a great idea to think how we can go further with that for future projects. So thank you. And thank you, Will, for such a wonderful, very meditative. That was the title, right? That's exactly what it was. So I think next we have some students from Bluebell School International in New Delhi. So it's quite late for them over there. So thank you so much for being with us. And we're, Anshika, I believe you'll be sharing. Are you ready?
Ma'am, it would be Amna Halim.
Nahalim, okay. Should be able to share your screen.
A very good morning to one and all present here. I'll be representing Bluebell School International from India, New Delhi. We were a team of 10 students under the guidance of 3 teachers, and we would like to present a video on to introduce our topic. Is my screen visible? Okay.
When I was created by the Almighty, just like a child, I wanted to transcend all boundaries, flow and be free. The cascading glaciers and narrow valleys, my allies they proved to be. From a child, gradually transitioned into a woman, they associated me with purity. I served as the pulsating vessel of Delhi. My water, these droplets, have quenched the thirst of many. Their divinity was smouldering within me with their proclamations, but these industrial affluents have robbed me of my identity, my salvation. These wastes have stained my existence. The will to flow I have no more. The filth has gradually penetrated my soul, grappling my inhabitants as the creatures that thrived within me yearn to breathe. The Yamuna speaks to you today. Behold, in your hands my destruction is seen. Witness how you have used me, abandoned and destroyed me. My end is near. Now I only bleed of the life that was once within me and cry froth for tears.
It has been heard that Titanic might sail again in 2022. Well, then it comes as good news that we have already melted all the icebergs till then. Today, we live in a world that has been strangled by the clutches of global warming and climate change. Daily, we just simply flip through the pages of the newspaper, covering haunting headlines of forests burning in one country after another. The temperature and water levels are rising. Animals are yearning to survive, and while always, the clock has been ticking. As the next generation, it becomes our responsibility to not only protect our environment, but also create an environment that needs no protection. A very good morning to one and all present here. Today, we have been given the opportunity to be a part of this esteemed Eco-Ambassador project. The sustainable goals are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals that are designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better, more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set up in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly. As a part of the project, we delve deeper into the 14th goal of sustainable development, life below water, and chose our topic to be as Yamuna, froth for tears. Now I would like to hand over to my teammate, Parth, for further proceedings.
So Yamuna is the lifeline for all the cities on its bank, especially New Delhi, where we live. And it's a holy river in mythology. But to some extent, its divinity has been stained with industrial effluence and human activity. This story is sort of a starter for anyone who does not really know what's wrong with the river, because all that's visible now is a sea of froth, and no one can really know why by just looking at it. It presents the river's history, significance, and lays down all what's wrong with the river. All this information at one place will let readers plan their own course of action, because in the end, no one but us, those who depend on the river, have the ability and responsibility to take action. I would like to hand over to Tanvi for further proceedings. My teammates for further proceedings.
Thank you, Parth. The subtopics that we have covered are mythological relevance of the river in Indian culture, instances of the river in Mughal history, brief introduction about the river, the area it covers, water supply distribution, causes of pollution in the river, and the action plan to reverse it. I would like to hand over to Meg for further proceedings.
Thank you, Tanveer. So we plan to use this platform as a medium to spread awareness among people all over the world and to inspire them to not only save the river Yamuna, but nature all around the globe. Based on our learnings and takeaways from the project, we plan to raise campaigns to online channels to make everyone more responsible towards nature and spread awareness about SDG 14, which is about conserving and sustainably using the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. I would now like to hand over to my teammate for further proceedings.
Thank you. Could you now please provide us feedback for what we have shown? Also, we would like to ask some questions at the end.
Great. I just wanted to let you finish scrolling before we go into the feedback session.
Can
Ross?
I just add on? I'm so sorry.
Ahead.
Just to explain a bit more about the topic that we've chosen and the aspects that we've covered. So Yamuna, as already mentioned, it's one of the holiest rivers. It's also one of the rivers that provides water to North India, and especially it's the pulsating river for Delhi. As students who live in Delhi, we chose this topic because I feel like it is something that is extremely important for us citizens to know about and to spread awareness about it. So we divided ourselves in such a way that some people were researching on the topic, and since a lot of our research is based on secondary research, we've added maps and graphs showing the life that existed in Yamuna, and how it has decreased over the years, so much so that it has been termed as the river that died, because there's absolutely no life left under Yamuna now. We have also shown the area coverage of Yamuna and the area it spans through North Delhi, and we've also mentioned the action plan towards the end. If you could scroll down, of how we can actually save and protect Yamuna. We have been mentioned the several steps taken by the government, but how they still need to be taken forward. We have mentioned about countries like Japan who are actually investing in rivers and the environment, and we have mentioned how there needs to be a certain set budget by our government to sort of protect the rivers. In the end, we've shown articles about Yamuna and how the situation actually improved during COVID when there was lack of human intervention. If you could scroll up, we've also added a few pieces of art which were drawn by our teammates. Can you just so this is a depiction of Yamuna as a goddess. So we mentioned about Yamuna in Indian mythology as well, and it is a river that is said to be extremely pure. It symbolizes purity, it symbolizes divinity. So we have mentioned how it has now become from divine to devalued. And can you show the next artwork as well? So this is another artwork that was drawn by one of our teammates, and it signifies how Yamuna has been completely degraded throughout time due to human intervention. And the heading that we chose, which is froth for tears, basically symbolizes froth is a toxic layer that has been accumulated on top of Yamuna, as you might have seen in the video or in the pictures shown in the story maps. It is a toxic white layer which has been accumulated due to industrial waste or due to human intervention with that river. So I think it's an important topic for us since it provides water to such a large part of India, and we think it's extremely imperative to spread awareness, and thus we've accumulated research to show how throughout time, this is a sort of a timeline, if you see how from the history of Yamuna to now, how throughout time it has been degraded.
I would like to further add on. So we have used two slideshows. The first slideshow, as it says, describes Mughal history. And though there were many civilizations like the Delhi Sultanate, which were built on the banks of the river Yamuna, the Mughals were one of the most famous. And this is a map of old Delhi. And here's the Yamuna flowing right to the left of it. And many Mughal rulers built their cities on the banks of the river because of ease of access to water, which in old times was very imperative. And though the civilization is not only limited to Delhi, for example, Agra is also another city which was on the banks of the river. The Taj Mahal, as all of us know, is also a beautiful monument and one of the seven wonders constructed on its banks. The second slideshow basically gives a highlight of the course of the river Yamuna from the Yamunotri Glacier in Uttarakhand, where the river originates, and it flows in a southerly direction, and it enters the plains where it's mainly used for agriculture. Then it enters Delhi and industrial effluents flow into it. And as the river gradually slows down, the effluents just keep getting piled up and piled up. And this becomes a problem because then it merges into the river Ganges and then into the Bay of Bengal. So it's not just the Yamuna that's being affected. It then flows to Mathura and Agra, and finally at Prayagraj, where it merges with the Ganges. These are some graphs we collected from our research. This shows the pH across months in Yamuna from April 2019 to March 21. And we also noticed, as Amna stated previously, that during lockdown and the peak of COVID, human activity was significantly reduced, and there's a direct correlation between the two. Also, another thing to mention is life under the river. Since it goes without saying for any ecosystem that life beneath it or around it is essential towards its survival. But the phytoplankton population in Yamuna is under continuous decline. And phytoplanktons are important because they are essential for breaking down carbon dioxide into organic molecules and sustaining a healthy ecosystem. So this creates a cycle, as mentioned. And though we've highlighted that the government can do many things to stop this, it's not always up to the government, and we must also take action ourselves. This is a poem composed by Amna.
Now we're
With that, we'd like to end.
Yes, we're open to feedback now. So.
Well, I'll just say that I love the combination of the art and the the facts about the issue combined with the maps, really bring in all these different elements and makes it so compelling. Ross, would you like to start with a feedback?
Sure. Well, beautiful job. I love that you've incorporated illustrations and artwork into this really important topic. You know, it's such a powerful way of evoking emotion and forming a connection with a topic. I think it's just, in terms of creating action, you know, artwork has always been a part of environmental movements, and you guys are using that digitally in such an effective way. I loved your video at the beginning as well. That was really powerful. And I'm curious if you've considered incorporating that some way into the story itself, or just your thoughts around how that could either set the stage, help introduce your story, and sort of be that hook to get people to keep reading. So that would be my first question to you all.
May I answer? So right now we just wanted it to be as an introductory video to sort of introduce our topic, but this is sort of an experiment and I think it worked out. So we will definitely add it towards the beginning of our PPT since it works as an introduction to our topic, which is Yamuna. So we'll definitely take that suggestion and add it in the final presentation.
I think not just the presentation, but the map itself, right? The story map itself. So in case people are seeing your map not in a like where you're not presenting it, but they're just finding it themselves, they'll be able to also be inspired the way we just were. Sorry, go ahead, Ross.
No, I agree. And it, you know, from a narrative standpoint, it could work really well at the beginning or at the end. It's like a concluding, you know, really sitting with your readers. I love how you've sort of customized the theme a little bit. You've really pushed the visual design of your story to sort of engage your readers. I think, you know, it makes your artwork and your other images really pop off the screen. So kudos to you all for really spending a lot of time. Your attention to detail, you know, is really evident and it's very polished. You know, it seems like such a creative team you guys have formed together. Both the analytical side, you know, you've got these powerful charts and figures, but also this creative sort of illustrations. And so I really love that you guys have been able to form this team that has, you know, really created a unique story that goes both analytical as well as beautiful, artistic. And I think those combinations are, you know, rare when it comes to storytelling. A lot of the times people are in their own lanes and there isn't this cross-pollination of ideas. And I think you guys have been able to navigate that really effectively. You know, I liked that you have that map in there. I would just as a suggestion, consider having a map early on to help readers who aren't familiar with this location just sort of center themselves on where this river is located and sort of not necessarily a reference map, but something that could match the sort of aesthetic of your story and be a way of sort of connecting people with this place. For those of us like myself who don't have an intimate knowledge of this river. And so, you know, again, you can do that with a simple express map where you just show sort of the line and you can customize the colors to match your theme, or, you know, bring in some of the more creative base maps that Esri provides. So within the express map, you can have like a watercolor base map if you wanted, or a base map that's very minimal and you can rely more on your sort of annotation on it. I would also just consider, this has been a common theme, the nav bar. Consider using the navigation bar to have, you know, the ability to jump between sections. I think it's, again, not required, just something that I'd love to hear if you've thought about having those sort of bookmarks where you can jump to different sections, help the reader know where they are in the whole story, and really allow the reader to, you know, if they're particularly interested in a given topic, jump to that topic. So just a suggestion or a comment. Yeah. Other feedback from folks?
Sure. Everything Ross said. I think as you scrolled through the story, it was just so evident that you really thought about every detail, like allowing enough space around text, putting quotes in, you know, to kind of break things up, using different blocks. I mean, it was just very evident that you gave all of those, a lot of thought and the different colors you put into it. It was just a really impressive story. The thing that struck me, aside from the video, when you were giving your presentation, you know, I think we all know numbers, charts, statistics, they're hard. They just are. As you were presenting, actually going through and explaining, you know, those little groups of charts and interpreting those, it really drove home what you were trying to say about the topic. And if I had any suggestion, it would be in some way to incorporate that kind of not heavy text. Maybe it's audio, maybe it's a sidecar. I'm not sure. Ross, I would love your thoughts on this, but it was just really powerful the way that you were explaining it and what those charts meant within the context of the story.
It was really clever that you used the gallery block to present those charts. I don't think I've seen anybody do that before. So that was really cool. Like Michelle said, you know, when you dug into them a little more and talked about, you know, this is the period, you know, when COVID was really, we could see that there was something going on here in terms of the amount of pollution. That's a really interesting fact and a really interesting observation that might have been lost by a reader who wasn't like really spending time digging into the chart. And so if there are sort of those key sort of observations, like Michelle was saying, call those out, because even if they seem really obvious to you guys, a lot of readers it might will miss it. And so, you know, those are really good points to just call out, whether it's text or sidecar. I think sidecar could be really effective if it's something you really want to call a lot of attention to, because it will slow down this. It'll just change up the pacing of the story. Right now, they're all really, you know, nicely aligned in that gallery block. And so you could add a caption there. You could add a little. There's a way to add like information about each image that's in that gallery. So you could have like a 2-line information about, like, during this period of time we observe this kind of action going on.
I don't know. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna on the same idea. You know, the idea I had was maybe even on the graphs. I noticed that there was some acronym titles to maybe just spell those out for people who aren't familiar with what those mean, or like a little arrow pointing start of lockdown just on the image itself. You know, could be easy ways to do it too. But those were just some thoughts.
I had one question on the StoryMap, and Amna, thanks for actually making our work easier, because some of us in Millburn, New Jersey are following the Rahway River and doing exactly what you are doing. So you just laid out this whole thing for us, and we now have a better, you know, way of doing it. But I just wanted to ask, since there are so many, my team here, eco ambassadors locally, there is one person who's actually hand drawing the Rahway River map. The other person, because she's an artist, the other person is, you know, collecting microplastic data. So many other, like, there's a history piece to it. So I just wanted to ask, there are so many different pieces. When does a story become so long? Because when I remember in the last workshop, you had mentioned that people have, what do you call it, scrolling fatigue. So will the navigation bar help to do that, or should we cut the story because our story has become very long? So many different dimensions, so many different aspects. There is a survey about the river, there is a microplastic data, and I think a lot of it will get missed out if the story itself is very long. So do you suggest to cut out the story and connect to another story on that topic itself, or do you think the navigation bar will help to just, if a reader is reading it, just go to that part where you're really interested in?
That's a great question, and I will start. I'll provide my perspective. So I always, the first question I usually ask folks when they're making a story is, who is your audience and what is your purpose? And so if your audience is somebody who has a lot of expertise or has a real passion for the topic of the story, then they're more likely to spend more time going through a longer story, right? They'll scroll to the very bottom because they are dedicated, they love this topic, right? If it's an audience that is less familiar, has less of a strong connection to the topic, then they're less likely to spend, 10, 15 minutes on the story. So in those cases, when the audience is perhaps less of an expert, less of a dedicated audience, I recommend doing shorter stories, but having multiple stories and combining those in as a collection or as individual standalone pieces. I think as people who are super passionate about various topics or have a lot of expertise on a specific topic, it's against our nature to leave something out, right? We want to include everything we can on a topic because you want to paint a truthful and a whole picture, right? But the reality is that we have limited amount of time to communicate that message before our audience leaves and goes on to the next piece of content. Everybody's busy, there's lots going on. And so I try to communicate or convey that, like, what are the 3 most important things you want your readers to know after reading your story? And then sometimes that lends itself to having other stories, other chapters, other individual stories that stand alone, or you can do that all in one story because your audience is either very dedicated or you're able to be very succinct and get to the point quickly and engage them throughout your story. I think it can be really helpful too to think about some of the other organizations that do this every day, thinking about like National Geographic, thinking about major news publications, thinking about the BBC, and how long are their digital stories? Again, you have to think about the audience that they are trying to reach and how they're, they have their own mechanisms for doing that. But they can provide some insight. If you are creating a story that's kind of designed for a broad public that has very little to no expertise on a subject, you're probably going to take an approach more similar to National Geographic or New York Times or any of these big publications, versus writing a lengthy sort of dissertation on a topic where somebody might have to spend 15 to 20 minutes on it. So it's definitely balance. Again, relating it back to the audience and purpose behind the story can be really helpful. I think the navigation bars can be really helpful for, again, it depends on the story and depends on the purpose behind the story. But the navigation bar, I think, provides readers with a way of moving through the content without just scrolling, right? And so having that option to jump to the call to action or jump to a specific fact or sort of filter out the content and then go back and do a deeper dive if they want. There are lots of techniques too to re-engage readers of stories. So if you think about that scroll fatigue, and I think, it's natural to feel this way as you're reading through a big body of text. There's a reason why people put photos in, right? And people people put in moving images, put in GIFs, put in little iconography, put in illustrations. Those visuals re-engage the reader and reinforce the text that's being presented. And so it allows you to both engage more of those visual learners, but also people who don't perhaps have as much time in the content of your story. I could talk about this for a long time because it's something that, we're all thinking about, right? Because we all have important stories to tell, and we want to engage people in them and cause people to, be informed, but also take action. I'd say maps are also one of those tools for engaging people in dense topics, right? So instead of writing, 3 paragraphs, you could have a map that's really well designed that communicates that message. That story rises out of the map. Same thing with a beautiful photograph or amazing video like we just saw. Instead of writing a long oration about like why this river is important, you see these visuals and it sits with you, right? You create an emotional connection. So there's lots of different mechanisms for engaging people and reducing that scroll fatigue. And I think people are more willing to continue scrolling if there's that content that sort of feeds that appetite and gets you connected to the topic. I don't know if that was helpful, but
Very helpful. Thank you, Ross.
All right, well, that was excellent. I believe we have Amrita, who's volunteered to present next. And I just want to check in on time because we're in our final half hour here. So if there's anyone else who hasn't let us know they'd like to present, if you just want to let me know in the chat so we can make sure we budget enough time. And I just wanted to mention one thought. I saw the connection between Ashley's and the Bluebell School group because Ashley talked about the toxic rivers and how 1 in 3 rivers are, humans shouldn't touch. So we can, put these together in a collection once everyone submits their final ones, but it could even be interesting to, refer to each other's where they're relevant at the bottom or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense to the Story Maps team, but I just love seeing those connections, and you can even use each other's story maps to help elaborate on some of these ideas. So yes, let's go ahead and hear from Amrita if you'd like to introduce yourself and share your screen.
Hi everyone, my name is Amrita. I am trying to share my screen right now. Can you guys see it?
yes, looks great.
Oh, okay, so I did the dead zones in the Gulf of California, and I started off by talking about dead zones in general, and I talked about the causes, and specifically they're caused by algae blooms and the results of eutrophication. Then I went into my map, and my map, the first layer was dissolved oxygen. And so I connected dissolved oxygen to the algae blooms and how excess nutrients, specifically from agriculture, lowers the dissolved oxygen. And at the bottom, I mentioned how if the dissolved oxygen levels are below 1, they're considered dead zones. So clicking through these, the dark green areas are usually below 1 or at 1. And then I went specifically into my area, which was the Gulf of California. And I connected it to my second layer, which was, it had the land cover of Mexico. And if you look here, it has, the yellow regions are cropland, and specifically that would be agriculture land. So the Yaqui River Valley is one of Mexico's most productive farming regions. And its big area often drains into the Gulf of California. And because of that, it causes enormous blooms each year, covering about 19 to 223 square miles. And so this statistic proves how the relationship between the agriculture and the blooms that have been prevalent each year. And then finally, I talked about the impacts and how this Gulf is Mexico's main fishing regions. And because of the red tides and because of the algae blooms, these fish are getting diseases and aren't able to live in their areas. So it kind of shows how there's detrimental impacts on both the ecosystems there and the industry. So yeah, that's what I have so far. I don't really know if we're supposed to have like a solution slide or not, but I'm thinking of adding one.
Great. Any questions in particular you have for our team here?
Is there any other like information I should add in addition to these? Because I know I talked about the causes and the effects and the background. I just don't know if there's anything else I should add.
Ross or Michelle, would you like to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I love the images you use. I think you're using the sidecar block really effectively here. One quick comment. So where you were talking about how the dark green corresponds to the dead zones, the value of 1.
Yeah.
Something that we love doing with our maps and these thematic maps is actually changing the color of the text to correspond to what it means on the map. So for instance, if you went down to that place where you have, a value of 1 indicates that, so a level below 1 are considered dead zones or hypoxic zones. If you just highlight that text, you can change the color of it so all the way on the right there, you could actually find the color that it corresponds to. And so in doing so, what that does is it connects what people are reading to the map and vice versa. So something to just experiment, and that can also be a way of doing it without needing a legend even. I think for somebody who's just seeing this for the first time and doesn't have a background in it, a legend could be helpful, and just making sure that, in that text, you indicate sort of what green corresponds to versus the blue, either in the text color or actually just spelling it out for people.
Okay.
So yeah, in terms of additional content, having that call to action, either again, depending on your audience and what action you want them to take, it could be anything from like keep reading about dead zones to, reduce the use of X, Y, and Z things. Because this is a story about dead zones in the Gulf of California, you might do something that allows people to actually zoom in on the map and see California. So, there's this thing called map actions, and Will, you were actually asking about this in the chat earlier about how you can actually zoom to a specific location on the map. If we have time, I can just show you how to do that real quick.
Okay. Yeah, that'll help.
Yeah, so if you go over on the left-hand side in the sidecar and add a new block, there'll be a way that go back to your map the slide you had before. Yeah, perfect. So you sort of have this map choreography as you zoom, as you scroll. But if you highlight some text here, so just highlight like that oxygen level below 1. See how there's that lightning bolt?
Yeah.
So click that. That enables something called map actions. And what you'll do is zoom in on the map to, let's say, to California. And so anytime somebody, there you go. Anytime somebody clicks on that text, it will zoom them into this location. So click Save Action. So try clicking on that oxygen level below 1 text. So that's what a map action does. It can either be a text or a button, and it allows, it'll zoom people in to a specific area that you're talking about. And so again, when we talk about sort of scroll fatigue and how you engage people with complex data sets, having map actions can help lead a reader through what you're trying to communicate to them.
Okay.
So just an interesting technique for everybody on the call, but also for the story to be able to reinforce how dead zones in the Gulf of California relate to these toxic zones.
Okay, thank you. That helped.
Other questions for us?
No, I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you so much for your feedback.
Of course, of course.
And I think adding a call to action, I just second that suggestion. I think it's great, since the end goal for these story maps, for us anyway, is to be able to share them, make them into learning resources that educators can use in their classrooms and help motivate their students to take action on these issues, including something along those lines. I think will be great. So thank you so much. Is there anyone else who wants to share, or even if you don't want to share, but you have a technical question or something that you're still thinking about with what you're working on? Now's the time. And you can either ask them in chat or go ahead and come off mute and ask. So go whenever you feel ready, please ask. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and just bring up.
Okay, so if I can say something, it's my, let's say, beginning with SDG. I'm really excited. I'm impressed by all the presentations that you prepared. It's something extraordinary for me. And I hope that I will understand all these goals that well, and I will be able to help my students understand them as well, and do something for our environment in the future. So thank you very much for let's say, igniting the small fire in my heart to do something more. Thank you very much.
That's great. Sorry.
I second that, and it'd be really cool if we could do a cross-school collection of some sort sometime this year. I think that'd be a really nice way to collaborate.
It's actually something we want to help facilitate during the school year, to get some different teachers together who want to use these in their classrooms, and to help go through some of the similar workshops and support sessions that we've been doing this summer, but formalizing more in classrooms. So we're very glad to hear that there's some of you interested in that already.
Well, I'm also planning to have an twinning project about SDG. It will be called Young SDG Ambassadors. And I was just wondering, maybe you would be able to give some kind of presentation for our students. if it's possible.
Yes, let's definitely communicate offline about that, or over email, or however you want to do that. We can talk more.
Perfect. We are starting in September, but I think that our activities will be done in October maybe. So I will probably email you, and I think that we can organize something together. That would be perfect.
Sure, and I think that's actually a good segue into what we're going to mention here at the end about some of the next steps. So as we mentioned before, we're hoping to have folks submit their final story maps by September 10th. And if you have any questions in the meantime, or, you know, for folks who weren't able to share today, but maybe still want to get a little feedback, you can reach out to us at the email ecoambassadors1@gmail.com. And then we have the International Conference on Sustainable Development coming up September 22nd, where we're going to be inviting some of those who submit to present. And that could be a great maybe entry point for students to sign up for that and come and see what other students have done to get excited about doing something similar during the course of the school year. So we'll be sharing details about that soon. And so I highly recommend maybe getting your students to come and join that event. And then for anyone who's still trying to brush up on some of the skills or familiarize yourself with some of the features that you can use, and we'll send this out again in an email. We have our YouTube playlist where we've been uploading all of the recorded sessions from the summer so far. And we have our Learn Path modules as well that go over the different details for both using ArcGIS to create maps and then using the StoryMaps platform as well. So we'll share these in the chat and share them in an email as well. And then I wanted to ask the StoryMaps team if you might mention a little bit about this competition that you have. This is another great opportunity that those of you who have put in all this hard work can potentially submit your story maps to this competition that Esri is holding.
Sure, we would love to share and love to see you all submit stories to our competition. So every year the StoryMaps team at Esri hosts a competition for storytellers of the year. Last year, we actually worked very closely with SDGs Today and SDSN on an SDG related competition. This year, we're partnering with National Geographic on a challenge specific to restoring our ocean. We're looking for ocean stories. We have 2 different tracks for people to enter. We have what we're calling a high school track, but obviously internationally, we're looking specifically 14 to 18 years old for that specific track in primary or high school. The second track is for either people who are in college or some kind of university or technical school, or of any age, or young professionals from 18 to 24 who maybe aren't in school right now. Maybe you're taking a break, just graduated, just trying to engage younger generation to help us save the planet through storytelling. So the competition or challenge is open now. We are accepting stories through October 22nd. The kinds of stories that you're telling today, it's exactly the kind of stories we're looking for. Towards the end, the StoryMaps team will actually narrow all of the submissions down to 20 finalists and pass it off to our guest judges. And we have some amazing educators. We have the geographer from National Geographic. We have our lead scientist at Esri who has explored the ocean bottom. We have a young explorer as well. So we're really excited to actually read the stories and hear feedback from our guest judges. In the end, we have multiple prizes, but I think the greatest outcome is that the winners will get to sit down with the young National Geographic explorer and just have a coffee chat all about the ocean and how we save our planet. So we're pretty excited about that. So to enter or learn more, you just go to esri.com/storymaps/contest. That'll get you there, and you can learn all about the competition and overview, and then hit the get started when you're ready to get an account and start building your story and actually submit your story. But Last year we had amazing stories coming in from all over the globe. And we're hoping we have the same response this year. So thanks for creating your stories, and please do submit them and share this opportunity. If you're a teacher, share them with your students. Hopefully you'll do some things in class that could apply as well, and share with your friends.
Thank you so much for providing those details, and we hope that all of you submit. I think they're so excellent. It'll be great to have you be up for this opportunity. We had a great question in the chat from Divya, who asked about submitting your story map. So yes, I think if you submit the link to the same email here, ecoambassadors1@gmail.com by September 10th, and we'll share that again in an email so everyone knows as well, but that's a good way to do it. And then, yeah, just want to thank all of our partners again, Esri, the StoryMaps team, SDGs Today, Global Schools Program, who has done a lot of outreach to get many of you involved, and then our Mission 4.7 partners. So thank you all for helping make this program happen. We've learned so much already. And then, yeah, we hope you all stay in touch. Again, our YouTube channel is youtube.com/ed4sd, and that's where you can find all of our talks that we do. And we have the playlist there where we have collected all of the sessions that we've done so far. So I think that's it for today. Thank you all. Thanks to Michelle and Ross for providing such excellent feedback to our Eco Ambassadors. And thanks to the students and teachers who presented amazing work so far. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.